Thank you, David. Provost, distinguished guests, it's an enormous honour to be back at my alma mater for an occasion of this kind. And unfortunately, I don't have a story of ambition to tell, the like of which we just heard from Elizabeth Ann. For indeed, it's easy to dismiss Trinity College Dublin's record in the 18th century as a failure. A crucial institution in the established public sphere, its role was to develop the leadership cadre of a decidedly Anglican Ireland. And despite the growth of the number of faculty from 19 in 1700 to 28 in 1750, in the second of these tasks, TCD was apparently falling short. Between 1720 and 1753, McDowell and Webb tell us, not a single publication was penned by a fellow of the college, not a record of publication we're allowed today. And meanwhile, the student curriculum lay unreformed and hence increasingly conservative in its content. Now, critics were robust in their assessment of the college, with Patrick Duignan, for example, caustically referring to its present deplorable state as late as 1777. Now, Trinity's moribund nature is set in stark relief when contrasted with the powerhouses of Scotland in the same period. Glasgow was home to an extraordinary lineage of moral philosophers. Francis Hutcheson, who had written in Dublin, Adam Smith and Thomas Reid all occupied the chair. Edinburgh, meanwhile, was home to an eclectic array of talent. The historian of Scotland, Spain and Latin America, William Robertson, the early sociologist Adam Ferguson, and the founder of English literary criticism, Hugh Blair. Even Aberdeen's divided houses of learning had their luminaries. Marshall hosted the poet and moralist James Beattie, while King's set Thomas Reid on his path to founding Scottish Common Sense School of Philosophy. Now, at the heart of Trinity's lax comparative performance can perhaps be identified a central and rather contemporary question. Now, the Scottish universities had found new purpose after the Anglo-Scottish Union of 1707 by educating the social elite of a newly depoliticised country, and in so doing had redirected the inquiry at the nature of their intellectual project away from the inculcation of political valour and towards the investment in social virtue. But what was Trinity's purpose? How might its work have been defined and defended in the era between the military victory at the Boyne and the political defeat represented by Anglo-Irish Union? How did TCD contribute to life in the old world colony of Ireland, marked out by penal legislation against Catholics and dissenters? What, in other words, was higher education for in 18th century Ireland? Now, despite my initial gloss, Trinity was not just a bulwark of Anglican hegemony. With the end of the European wars of religion, which arguably indeed ended on Irish soil in the War of the Two Kings of 1688 to 91, to which Elizabeth Ann referred, it was not only possible to defend Trinity through reference to its 17th century mission, it was no longer possible to uphold confessional identity in quite the same way as Elizabeth Ann has suggested. Frankly, the Enlightenment saw to that. This pan-European movement sought to mitigate the ill effects of confessional conflict and to promulgate a tolerant attitude towards religious diversity, itself religion being recast as a form of social ritual and personal expression, not as a matter of dogmatic certitude. Now, this form of secularization, if that is indeed the right word for a reformulation of faith that retained both a sense of wonder and an awareness of the supernatural, but this form of secularization rejected the amplification of doctrinal differences and renounced the violence performed in pursuit of purification. It challenged the confessional elites, of which the Anglicans were one, to recalibrate their claims to supremacy and to re-narrate their demands for obedience. Moreover, to the extent that Anglican orthodoxy in Ireland was maintained, its locus was not to be found inside the college walls. The presence and augmentation of a self-consciously English interest in church and state, personified by Hugh Boulter, Archbishop of Armagh, suggests that the overflow of higher-educated Englishmen into Ireland challenged Trinity's latent cultural hegemony. This need to manage the competing demands of local interest, represented by Archbishop King, for example, of Dublin, with the British question, shaped the institution then just as it does now. So given this set of challenges, what kind of intellectual capital did Trinity have? Then, as now, numerous possibilities presented themselves. First, there was the simple claim to be a repository of ancient and modern learning. The formidable achievement of erecting the Long Room Library was a statement of just this sort. It was a public declaration of Trinity's resources and its capacity to marshal them, making them accessible and applicable to the current climate of concern. Just as the marketing of today's universities is adorned with pictures of the facilities applicants can expect and with images students hived away in useful study, so the images of Trinity's library building, then circulating in 18th century Dublin, spoke of its public function in conserving wisdom. But Trinity was losing its monopoly of this task. The opening of the Marshes Library in 1704, for example, was one such breach. Another was the medical reading room established by Edward Worth. Students no longer had to rely on Trinity's holdings to source either spiritual or physical knowledge. And just as the internet today complicates the value of the scholarly library, so the rise of a vibrant reprint trade along Dame Street, together with the undercurrent of a Grub Street of scandal and satire circulating from London, subverted any simple claim to intellectual supremacy that Trinity might have had. As already suggested, the traditional commitment of the college to the task of upholding religious conformity was also being subverted by the burgeoning Enlightenment. Certainly its formal position as a religious citadel was only institutionally challenged late in the century with the foundation of Maynooth in 1795. Yet ground was relinquished as the orthodoxies of the Church of Ireland receded and suspect modes of spiritual expression welled up. The idiosyncratic nature of George Berkeley's justifications for faith were in no way exemplary, but the presence of his name on the list of fellows problematizes any simple identification between Trinity and Orthodox Anglicanism. If Trinity was not a home to a moderate church party, as Edinburgh was, it was informed by a broad turn towards Erastianism and Arianism that was shaping European liberal Protestantism in the period. In the provocative denial of the Nicene Creed, penned by Berkeley's adjutant in the Bermuda Project, Robert Clayton, another fellow of the college risked a trial for heresy, only avoiding public censure by dying before the charges could be brought. Helped him a little bit. If the Enlightenment undermined the task of defending religious conformity, it may have supported a different rationale for higher learning, namely economic development. Ireland was clearly on the second side of the rich country, poor country debate that thrived among Europe's literati. And if John Robertson is right to identify the Enlightenment with the project of this worldly amelioration, then Trinity might well perhaps lay claim to some enlightened purpose in its works. After all, Trinity was the initial venue for meetings of the Dublin Philosophical Society in the late 17th century, which was grounded in a Baconian concern for pragmatic learning as much as it was informed by Cartesian speculations about theoretical debates. While the early member, Sir George Ashe, of whom we just heard, later provost of the college, William Molyneux who truly exemplified this mixed economy of learning. He translated Descartes' meditations while compiling weather data and published on the technical development of telescopes. Molyneux was a graduate of Trinity and held the seat reserved for the University of Dublin in the Irish Parliament, sitting from 1692 until his death 6 years later. Yet for all the institutional intimacy that existed between TCD and the DPS, the fact that the Philosophical Society spun out from the college suggests that the commitment to improvement was not a monopoly of higher education. Indeed, the foundation of the Dublin Society in 1731 illustrates how the project of economic enhancement found its centre of gravity in the associational world of clubs and societies that thrived in urban Ireland. The foundation of the Royal Irish Academy in 1782 embodied a similar challenge to another possible motivating force for the college, namely its claim on the production of advanced critical knowledge. The Royal Irish Academy openly competed with Trinity's learned ambitions in this regard. However, Trinity was notably lethargic about the reorganising of the disciplines and the emergence of what we would now term the social and applied sciences. Faculty positions in medicine and midwifery were much delayed outcomes of a private bequest from Sir Patrick Dunn, and the endowment of a chair in music in 1764 was rather undermined by the fact that the first holder, the Earl of Mornington, deemed the post to be honorary and spent most of his life in London. If the college was staking a claim to be a bastion of erudition, this was clearly an inauspicious way in which to do so. Moreover, if the King's professorships endowed by Dunn are suggestive of a role for the Trinity in the training of the professional cadre of medics and surgeons, who, alongside the ranks of lawyers, could mirror those literati that lit up the firmament of the Scottish Enlightenment, this appearance is deceptive. Just as with the previous two purposes, the creative energy towards professional training was largely located beyond the college. Nominally connected to Trinity, in reality the Royal College of Physicians worked as an independent regulatory and examining body from the issue of its charter in 1692, eventually breaking even the most tenuous of its ties in 1761. The connection to the Royal College of Surgeons, founded in 1784, was even less close, with the formative group of like-minded practitioners having to meet in such venues as the Eagle Tavern in Eustace Street in the years before formal recognition was granted. As for the lawmen, they sought out their training in London, with Trinity graduates such as Edmund Burke making his way to the Middle Temple to seek out the qualifications required to practice at the bar. One final possibility remains, and it relates to Trinity's explicit location, its place on College Green, across the thoroughfare from the Irish Parliament House. Now, this suggests that Trinity may have been instrumental in the development of a cadre of leaders of the establishment. This is to understand Trinity as providing a form of social capital, not intellectual capital, suggesting its fundamental purpose was the production of social distinction. This blend of classical learning and polite etiquette imparted in the college shaped the behaviour and minds of its graduates and provided a core of educated young men that at once knew each other and could interact personably together in private as well as in public. Trinity created an effective fraternity, a group of men connected by the elective affinities resulting from exam stress, nights out, and the exchange of ideas at a formative stage. This concern with social capital underpinned the changes introduced by Provost John Healy Hutchison in the 1770s, to which Patrick Digan had taken such offence. He established prizes to be awarded for composition in Greek, Latin, and English. But more innovative was his ambition to establish chairs in modern languages, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and he floated a failed project to fund a riding house. However, if all this suggests that Trinity found a purpose in investing in social capital, the vital consequence of this was that Trinity also served as a political nursery to the men who gathered across the road on College Green in the Irish Parliament. Their understanding of the political realm, their intellectual reservoir of models of exemplary conduct, the oratory that they relied upon to articulate their views, and the political theories of ascendancy, patriotism, and republicanism they enunciated all found origins in the days spent in Trinity's confines. The student life taught them how to debate with each other and about the vital questions of the age, the rigours of faith, the demands of economic necessity, and the brokerage of political power. In that, Trinity conducted an internal debate, not just about its own place in Irish society, but about the place of Irish society in the wider environments of Britain, Europe, and the Empire. Trinity thus was a wellspring for Ireland's discussion about the nature of the establishment of the Ancien regime and the colonial implications of imperial outreach. That was the consequence of its location in what David Dixon has nicely termed an old world colony. Above all, this is what made Trinity an enlightened institution, its capacity to conduct a debate around that most enlightened of questions, the nature of its own legitimacy. In 18th century Ireland, establishment rule was not a given, written into the order of things either by the natural law or the divine will. Instead, authority needed to be justified, its claims defended, its actions accepted, and its imposition validated. Trinity College Dublin was a place for this dispute to be conducted. In the 1790s, Irish society as a whole fragmented and factionalised, resulting in a bitter internecine war. Trinity was not unaffected, nor did it simply take a single side. It found itself debating the consequences of the French Revolution and the incipient ideas of the rights of man. The student body housed a cell of United Irish sympathisers, to whom David referred earlier, who were expelled for their radicalism by a faculty determined to defend the verities of the Ancien regime. They in turn rejected even the legalistic patriotism of Henry Grattan, symbolically removing his portrait from public display. By the time of the Union then, Trinity was a microcosm of Anglican Ireland, defensive and insecure, seeking radical solutions to the existential crisis incurred by the rebellion of 1798. So who then might be thought of to embody this complex, multi-sided debate? And my choice of an exemplary figure would be Thomas Leland, professor of oratory from 1763. He was professionally concerned with shaping the performative speech of his young charges. He wrote a thoughtful dissertation on the principles of human eloquence, which built upon the celebrated writings of Thomas Sheridan, whose student he was. He was also concerned with the maintenance and dissemination of classical learning, producing an edition of the Philippics of Demosthenes in 1753, thereby breaking Trinity's barren spell at the printing press. He was the author of a remarkable novel, Longsword, which has been read as an early contribution to the Gothic form. As a historian, he not only penned a life of Philip of Macedon, but contributed to antiquarian debates with his History of Ireland from the invasion of Henry II of 1773. A fellow of Trinity College Dublin from 1746, and a Church of Ireland minister from 1748, he embodied the contradictions, confusion, and creative energies that Trinity and its predicament contained. If Trinity was indeed an enlightened institution, it was because it confronted the ambiguities of its own history and debated its relationship to the society it inhabited. Leland contributed mightily to that discussion, and in him Trinity may have found an enlightener in chief. The challenge he confronted is one Trinity still faces today, of course, that of articulating a rationale in an Ireland challenged by religious division, economic uncertainty, and political disagreement. And in reflecting on his commitment to civility, creativity, scholarship, and to Ireland, we reflect on how the institution we celebrate here today has continued to find fresh ways to enlighten Ireland. Thank you very much.